Hey, Dustin, it is good to finally link up with you and kind of switch roles on the podcast realm. I know it was pretty cool being on Mountain Tough's podcast almost a year ago and just sharing some of my story. So happy to reverse roles here. But yeah, I really want to dig into your story, how that led to Mountain Tough, the role leadership plays, how mental toughness integrates in that, and really, from your optic, how Mountain Tough, physical fitness, mental toughness, all that ties into the leadership realm. So, yeah, let's get started, man. Give us the Dustin slash Mountain Tough story.
I'm excited, man. I think it's awesome to be here. It's awesome you're doing a podcast now. I think it's really cool. It's important to get the more content that gets out in the world around, mental toughness and mental fitness and people doing hard things so they can live a more virtuous life. I mean, the more people that can get more content out related to that is amazing. And your mindset work is phenomenal. So I think the more that message gets out, the better. It's really cool.
Awesome.
The Mountain Tough story is a long one, so I might be chatting about this for a little while, but it's kind of a crazy journey that led to the creation of Mountain Tough.
No, send it.
Awesome. So the the whole kind of entirety of the Mountain Tough story is I I grew up in Montana, and I came from a big family. So my dad's from a family of nine, and seven of those nine were boys and two were girls. And they grew up outside of Sheridan, Wyoming in the Bighorn Mountains. And so what kind of happened is my childhood was very outdoorsy with all those uncles living near the mountains. Kind of our whole childhood was backpacking, hunting, fishing, backcountry hunting, camping, boating. We were kind of spending as much time outside as possible. That was kind of the lifestyle of our family. And our family was really kind of big on hunting. And then later on, the story kind of started getting a lot more focused on archery hunting and backcountry elk hunting. And so my dad, when I was about a sophomore in high school, he went really deep down the rabbit hole of archery. And our family is pretty obsessive. So when we find something that we're interested in, we kind of
I
go,
just want to do a quick caveat. This coming from someone who just did a 10K body weight sled push. So when you say obsessive, you're not like, yeah, I have to flick the light on and off 3 times. You're like all in obsessive. So it's genetic. It's good to know.
yeah, we like to go all in, and then we get bored and we switch and we go all in on something else. But everything has to be new and challenging. And so he got into this archery, and we were shooting every single day at noon. His office was right by the local archery shop in Billings, Montana, and I'd meet him over there. And then he took it to a new level, and he was doing indoor competitions, archery, and going to the national indoor championships in Las Vegas. And so we were surrounded by shooting bows. And what happened is, that transitioned right to our hunting, and we went really deep into archery elk hunting. And so we were archery elk hunting all over the Rocky Mountain West. And that kind of carried with me into college and became one of my main passions. So when I went to college, I went to Montana State in Bozeman, specifically to be surrounded by the mountains and to be more in the outdoors. And a big part of that was I wanted to be in an area where I could do as much archery elk hunting as possible. And at that time is also kind of when these fitness components of Mountain Tough started, these little puzzle pieces started coming together at that time. Because in high school I wasn't obsessed with fitness at all, but I was obsessed with elk hunting and archery elk hunting and backcountry hunting. And then when I got to Montana State, that's kind of when this gym rat kind of situation started brewing. So I started training in the gym, lifting weights, but it I was just lucky in that the guys that I was training with were wildland firefighters. And so we were lifting heavy and working hard in the gym, but because they were wildland guys, we were specifically kind of training in a way without knowing it to be better in the backcountry, to be better in the mountains, to be really functional strong. We weren't we weren't in an area of life where we were focused on just bodybuilding type movements or just lifting weights to look better. Even at that time, we were focused quite a bit on training to be better in the backcountry. And it was a really fortunate part of my journey because wildland firefighters, smoke jumpers, and hot shots are very, very similar to a backcountry hunter or a military athlete, where you have to be really functionally fit to handle almost anything. But those same firefighting athletes also are carrying heavy packs all the time. And so that created my obsessive nature that I took from archery elk hunting. I took right into the gym, and we were training really hard to be functionally fit for the backcountry. There wasn't any business around it at that time. It was just that's kind of what we were doing as part of our lifestyle. And I loved it. And I loved how I could see the difference it could make in a hunting season, and how you could start noticing different things you did in training were going to directly relate to how you felt that fall in September when you were in the mountains hunting. That was a really fun part of the journey. And then I met my wife, and
So
my
was
wife.
there, just real quick, if we can dig into that. So was there parts, like was there certain stuff that stood out in the gym that you're like, oh, this is pain? Like was there certain thing like lunges, man? Whenever I do lunges, I'm better in the back. Was there something specific, or was it just general at that point?
I think in that at that point it was single leg strength and stability that we started to notice, because that was back in the day. Essentially now, in mostly what you saw in the gym, and we were like at a Gold's Gym in Bozeman, Montana too. So at a Gold's Gym, you'd see all bodybuilders, or you would see people squatting or deadlifting heavy. And what became apparent is like squatting and deadlifting heavy all the time isn't giving your body any single leg strength and stability. So we started picking up on things like a lot of balance and single leg work was paying off in the backcountry. So a lot more of your lunges, your Bulgarian lunges, your asymmetrical lunges, you started noticing like this is a lot more helpful in the backcountry than just deadlifting all the time heavy on an even surface with an even bar. Because in the backcountry or in the real world, nothing's balanced and nothing's even.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, I was curious because it sounded like, when you're talking about there, we really started noticing impacts from certain stuff. And so that totally makes sense. Awesome. Thanks, man. I'll let you drive on. You were sharing with meeting your wife.
Yeah, you bet. And so then I met my wife, and my wife was she still is to this day. She's the runner in the family. So there are some people that run for fitness, and there's some people in the world that love running, and she's the type of person that loves running. She got the runner's high, and running was her jam. And when we met, I hated running. I still kind of hate running. I love running.
I can relate to this very closely so far.
It's very similar to your story from that perspective. And but I'm an all-in type of guy. And so I was like, well, like if she likes running and we're doing some running together, and I hate it, like we might as well go big on this thing and go all in. So we started doing a lot of marathons, and we kind of take a lot of things over the top. So we went from I actually the
I,
first
I love I love that it wasn't like, and we decided to train for a marathon. It's like we started doing a lot of marathons, and then we were looking for longer distance stuff. Like, you should probably talk to someone about this, but I'm not that person. So drive on. It's fascinating.
well, I'm not a lot of ways I'm not very smart, and I don't recommend to a lot of people doing exactly what I do. But actually, the first race that we ever ran was that I ever ran in my life was a marathon. So we kind of skipped that 5K and 10K and half marathon journey. And I was
Yeah,
like,
most people start with like the 2 mile reindeer run, and they're dressed as a character or something. You guys just went straight to a marathon. Love it.
we went straight in, and I did fall in love with it. I fell in love with the mind games, and the mind games were so interesting to me in running. And in our marathon journey, it did transition into mountain running just because we're in Bozeman. I think it was kind of natural where in Bozeman road marathons are more rare, and the mountain marathons and 50Ks are a lot more prevalent. And so we transitioned from our marathon journey into getting a lot more interested in mountain running. And at that time, it was it was a lot of 50Ks, and those have progressed a lot in the last 5 or 10 years where you see a lot more 100 milers and plus distances. But at that time we were really into the 50Ks, and I loved the mental side because your whole body's kind of telling you you should stop, you should take a break, you should not finish this thing, and you have to find these little mindset hacks to get to that finish, to get through those last 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 miles. And that's really when I started paying a lot of attention to mindset and mental toughness and kind of building this toolbox so that you had different tactics to deploy based on different adverse situations you were facing. And the mountain tough ideas kept starting to come together as well. Those puzzle pieces were always floating around, but they started coming together because what happened was I'd kind of left that I kind of left that gym rat season training with those firefighters to doing a lot of running with my wife, from the marathons to the mountain ultra marathons. And then I went
Because
into
marathons aren't long enough. Got it.
then I went into that fall hunting season, and I was so excited because a lot of the races in Bozeman that are in the mountains during the summer, those are the same mountains that you're going to be elk hunting in later that fall in September, just a couple months later. So I was thinking, like, you're lean, you're mean, you're flying through the backcountry. It's going to be the best elk hunting season ever. And I actually that was true in so many areas. So I went into the backcountry that fall, and I actually harvested an elk with my bow that September after doing all of that running. And you could fly through the backcountry based on that kind of training schedule. But what happened was it actually was the worst pack out of my life
Yeah.
that September. And that's when really the big light bulb went off. Was I lost so much strength for those heavy loads to get that animal off the mountain from doing so much running, that it was very obvious that someone should train backcountry hunters in a mission specific way. Someone should break down the science of, like, what does it take to be really successful as a backcountry hunter from the skill requirement level, study those skill requirements, train specifically to those skill requirements, so that not only can you navigate really well through the backcountry, but you also can thrive through that heavy pack out. And so that's kind of when those puzzle pieces started coming together.
Yeah, it's almost like a gear shift, right? Like it's endurance heavy. I mean, you're still carrying a pack, and depending on how long you're in the backcountry for, that pack can be 30, 50, 60 pounds. Depending, water, all kinds of variables. But yeah, then when you're packing out elk quarters or moose quarters, whatever you're going after, total game changer, especially steep, rocky, unpredictable terrain and weather patterns.
Hmm.
I think you hit on it before, like wildland firefighters, military, special operations, or folks, who are on the ground. Yeah, similar problems. It's like, hey, can you go day after day, long endurance, heavy weight, stay healthy, and then when you need it, can you apply a ton of power, ton of speed, ton of strength in short bursts or over critical times?
Hmm.
So no, totally dig it. So at this point, you're still putting all the pieces together in your head. You're experiencing it yourself as you're out in the backcountry. Um, I mean, what next? Lindsay's got you running, 300 milers at this point now because you're looking for the next thing. Bow hunting's too easy, so now you're trying to hunt elk with like sharp sticks. I don't know what else. Yeah, what happens next in your journey?
So the really kind of wild part of the story was that epiphany moment happened, and Lindsay and I, my wife, had both graduated from Montana State, and I had a business management degree, entrepreneurship and marketing, and she had a marketing degree. And we we had both got amazing Bozeman jobs. So it felt in a way that like the world, America, like society kind of like told us like you should go to college, get a degree, and then get a great job. And
Yeah,
essentially like I felt like we kind of did what the world told us to do, but we found ourselves really kind of depressed in those situations. And it was really interesting because I I got an amazing job right out of college that like even to this day on paper was like a phenomenally high paying job, phenomenal benefits, like all like people graduating now would kind of like strive for that job from a if you're graduating with a business degree, but I was there and pretty unhappy. And a lot of that unhappiness was I kind of instead of listening to like myself and chasing my own passions and interests, I kind of was doing what the world told me to do. But I found myself, stuck at a desk, stuck on the phone all day. And it wasn't filling my cup with, like my real passions were being outside quite a bit and being physically active all the time. And my wife was going through a very similar battle where she kind of did what the world told her to do and what she thought she should do. And she had a phenomenal job as well at a phenomenal marketing agency. And so we're both kind of struggling with that, where you kind of, we felt like we were kind of seduced to chase the wrong path. And we chased that path. And then you get there and you're like, man, this isn't really what I wanted. And so we actually both quit our jobs and we both quit our jobs and we went to work in Africa. And we
that's
met
a
a
long commute from Bozeman.
it was a big commute. So we packed our bags and we sold a lot of our possessions and sold some vehicles and put a few things in storage, and we went to work in Uganda for a Bozeman guy had actually been building orphanages in Uganda to try to help kids that were coming out of the civil war that had been going on there for a while. That civil war was led by a bad guy named Joseph Kony, and Joseph Kony ran a organization called the LRA, which was the Lord's Resistance Army, and he's infamous because he used a lot of child soldiers to massacre a lot of people, like 600,000 people. And through all of that, and because it happened through so many years, Uganda was definitely full of a tremendous amount of orphans. And so he had gone over there to do as much as he could to help. And he'd been doing that for about a decade. But his latest idea that we ended up going to work for was so aligned with our passions and interests because his big mission was we should raise future leaders of Uganda that are entrepreneurial and know how
Mhm.
to run their own business so that they can feed their own family and get out of this orphanage cycle. And so it was a campus with 240 kids, and we had a primary school and a secondary school, a church, and we had a pineapple grove where the kids farmed pineapples and then sold them as a micro business. We had an egg production micro business. We had a dairy milk micro business, and we had a tilapia pond micro business. And it was like the coolest, most rewarding, most adrenaline pumping job ever. I mean, we were working together. My wife was running the nursing clinic, and nursing turned out to be her big passion. My big passion was always entrepreneurship type stuff. And so we were kind of just rocking and rolling. And we were so glad that we kind of walked away from those very good jobs that we were miserable in. Like, even though our family thought we were crazy, our friends thought we were crazy, like we had a lot of close family members telling us like, absolutely not, you can't quit this great job in Bozeman, sell all your stuff and go work in Africa. But that's what we did, and it was like one of the best decisions we ever made.
I think that's amazing. I think so many people, right? You were programmed by society to think this is what success looks like. Typical, growing up middle America today. I need to go to a D1 school. I need to get a degree in A, B, or C. I need to be an engineer or business or, whatever it is. And again, nothing wrong with any of those scripts if that's yours. But I think so many of us go, okay, I need a degree. I need the partner. I need the family. I need the job. I need, it's all these numbers and box checks. And then they achieve it. And they're like, okay, I feel kind of empty. And I don't think everyone does. I think for some people, that's absolutely the right path. But by default, I think a lot of us assume that this is what I should do. And then they get there and they're like, but I feel wildly unfulfilled, which I love because that's like StoneWater's target demographic is successful people going, now what? Like I've checked all the boxes and this
Yeah.
isn't, I have more to give. And I love that, you guys kind of burn the bridges and like, all right, let's go to Uganda. And were you primarily working with orphans from the conflict or like child soldiers rehabilitation or a mix? How that worked? Because I always found that, the the different, child soldier rehabilitation programs, in Africa, specifically Uganda and LRA, like
Hmm.
such a challenging but meaningful like effort. But I'm curious, what were you guys doing there exactly?
Yeah, it was crazy, man. We had about 80% orphans and about 20% child soldiers.
Wow.
And they were mixed. And the mix actually was really powerful in their rehabilitation. And I mean, it's drastic stuff. I don't know if everyone is as aware of what was actually happening over there, but like there was a kid named Dennis in our orphanage, and he actually was in his village when Joseph Kony's guys came through, and they actually stood them out in front of the village, and they actually held a pistol to Dennis's brother's forehead, and they asked him if he would join the LRA and fight, and his brother said no, and they pulled the trigger and shot him right next to Dennis. And so then they moved the gun over to Dennis, and they asked the same question in the same way. And they said, will you fight for the LRA? And he said, yes, of course, after watching what just happened to his brother. But it's drastic. Like that same night that he said yes, they actually sent him into a village, and he he has a video testimony where he actually that night went into the village, and he actually had to murder people with a machete the night that he was essentially forced to be in the LRA.
Hmm.
So like the levels of like the levels of human suffering that are, so different depending on where you're at in the world. Like that was really eye-opening to us. We really had no idea until that point just kind of how fortunate we are to live where we live and grow up where we grew up.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency to lose perspective, like we just become acclimated to our environment, right? What's hard here is hard to me now, but you lose that perspective of no, no, what was hard in Uganda in the late 90s, early 2000s. Like we don't, it doesn't even fit on our continuum of the human
Mhm.
experience. Like we can't even imagine it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I saw a little bit, obviously not like Dennis, but from different conflict zones, and just realizing like, okay, this is a whole different piece. But I think, yeah, when you look at what was going on in in East Africa and that area at the time, the child soldiers and just the repetitive and accumulated trauma that would go, like even that short vignette you share. But life goes on, right? How does Denny move forward from that?
Mhm.
That's powerful stuff. Do you still maintain any contact with the organization or the people, or where's that at now? Because I know you've moved on, from that experience, and we'll get there. But
Yeah, we don't have much we don't have much contact anymore. We we ultimately, ended up coming home, and we'll get to that part of the story, but we haven't stayed in much close contact.
because this was probably early 2000 aughts that is happening, like 2012, 13 that you were over there. Where are we at for timeline?
Yep. Yeah, so we ended up eh, that next part of the story is that we we were so that job was so cup filling and rewarding. We did think that we were going to do it for the long haul. Like we were going all in on that as being our career for quite some time, and so we we moved in the direction of like building a guest house over there where we were living there full time. We had, little separate quarters for Lindsay and I, and we ended up Lindsay ended up getting pregnant. We ended up getting pregnant with our first daughter, and our first daughter was the the reason that we kind of came back home. But it's so fascinating thinking about it now because we we were so naive. We Lindsay got pregnant in Africa, and we're like, well, no big deal. We'll fly home to Bozeman. We'll have our daughter delivered in an American hospital, and then we'll stay with friends and family for about 6 weeks, and then we'll just fly back over to Africa and go back to work with our little baby with us. And we had no other plan. That was our plan. It made perfect sense in our heads at that time without having any kids. And when our daughter was actually born, that's when it like this huge moment happened where it was really obvious right away that like we can't go right back. With the safety concerns, the health concerns, and the logistics, travel. It was like, man, we're not going back for a while, and we have to protect and provide for this little human of our own for some time. And we were stuck in Bozeman at that moment, kind of without a plan B, which is really interesting because we were so naive. We didn't have like a bunch of other jobs lined up. We didn't have housing lined up. And so we really kind of had that burn the ships moment, but we didn't burn the ships on purpose necessarily. Like, but it was a burn the ships moment of like, now's kind of the time to go all in on this mountain tough journey, because the mountain tough puzzle pieces in that story had been coming together for long enough. But with that Africa chunk thrown in the middle, like we still hadn't pursued it yet. But at that moment when our daughter was born, it was kind of like, now's the time, because I don't really want to go back to corporate America and just get a job to get a job, because I knew I would be unhappy again. So it was a really cool burn the ships moment where it's like, let's go all in on this now because now's the perfect opportunity. But it started it started so scrappy. I mean, the Mountain Tough startup story is pretty funny after that moment because our daughter's born, and I, we didn't have a gym, we didn't have a lab, we just had this idea, and I actually drew the logo on a napkin, and my buddy who's a graphic designer turned it into a logo, and I
Was your first sandbag workout actually using your newborn daughter as like the sandbag? Like safely, of course.
I that would have been a great idea, but we actually, after I got that logo, I hung a flyer that it was just the logo and it said looking to train backcountry hunters, and I hung it at the bow shop, and three guys called. I still know the three guys, and we actually started Mountain Tough training in the park behind my house based off that flyer. So we were doing lunges in the soccer field and pull-ups on the monkey bars, and it just kind of kept growing and growing and growing, and people really latched on right away to this idea of mission specific training for the backcountry almost since day one. Like I talked to a lot of people about Mount Tough, and I always feel like it was God breathed, and I always feel like the market was kind of just sitting there waiting for it to exist. Because I think subconsciously everyone knew that they probably should train specifically for the mountains if they're going to do something in the mountains, but no one really had a step by step plan that's like, okay, this is what I should do. And so it's been a really cool journey since then. It's felt like it's been the market was waiting for it to exist, and that was in 2016 when we got it off the ground.
Yeah, that's so when you came up with the concept Mountain Tough, when you like had that first flyer design and hung up at the gym, like what in your mind, did you have a this is our mission or this is my why? Or was it more like just like let it rip and see what happens?
It's funny because for some reason early on, I don't think it was in day one or the first month, but earlier than most, for some reason I knew it was a product that I wanted the world to have access to. And so in that first year, a lot of people would ask me like, are you just going for a gym? Or are you just going for a brick and mortar gym where you run Mountain Tough classes all the time and train people all the time? And every time I got asked that question in even that first year, I would say no. I want like the whole country, the whole world to have access to this training.
Hmm.
I don't know exactly how that came to be, but I think part of it was related to, like, earlier in my life I'd tried quite a few entrepreneurial things. So I'd always had that mindset of like trying and starting little micro businesses. And one thing that stood out to me from those learnings and those failures is anything that I wanted to start next based off those prior learnings, I wanted it to be scalable.
Hmm.
And so this idea of scalable was really powerful in my mind at that time. And I knew like one brick or mortar gym with just me in it is not very scalable. So very early on, I was like, this is a theory of training for the backcountry with a certain mission and ethos behind it that I want to scale so that anyone can access it regardless of where they live.
So you guys went from doing lunges in a soccer field behind your place to what was the next step? Brick and mortar, and then when did Mountain Tough kind of really explode and become scalable and become online? What was that path like?
Yeah, so those steps were cool because we were doing the soccer field sessions, and it was so awesome as an entrepreneur because it went from like one morning class with a few guys to a big morning crew to a morning crew and a noon crew and an afternoon crew, and those were so much fun. But what started to happen in Bozeman was like, those are awesome in the summer, but you can't train in the soccer field in the winter. And I was like, man, I really kind of need to find a gym to go to. And our friend had an orthopedic clinic, and he's like, bring Mountain Tough in. you can lease gym space. And so I did that for 2 years where we leased gym space, ran Mountain Tough class locally 3 times a day. And it was really when two things happened that made it take off and actually be a scalable company. One was we assembled the team, and I think that's so important for other entrepreneurs. Was we the idea was there, and part of the idea with Mountain Tough was it has to be world class training, mission specific training, but it has to also help our customers be mentally tough and mentally equipped to chase any goal that they're going after. So very early on, we knew that the most accomplished backcountry hunters are some of the most mentally tough people in the world. So if we're going to train people for the backcountry, we should train them physically, but also mentally. And those were our founding principles. And so I started assembling the team around those founding principles. And so we hired 2 folks from special operations to add some guidance and advice on the mental toughness side. So we brought on board a Navy SEAL, we brought on board an Army Ranger, but we also brought on board a a trainer, a local legend that had been helping people in the Bozeman area for a long time, on like advanced expeditions like K2 and Everest. And it was when that team got assembled that it was like, all right, we got the mission, we got the team, and now we have a place to go. And the place that we went was we took everything we were doing locally and we put it available online. So our very first product was Mountain Tough preseason prep, and we didn't have an app yet. It was just hosted on a Mountain Tough type website. But that's when it really took off, because now there was Mountain Tough preseason prep for the backcountry hunter that was studied and tested and built specifically for people to follow step by step, and anyone in the world could access it through a website. And that's when it really started exploding.
Love it. Yeah. And I also like how you got the team together, you made it so it was available to anyone. And then you also, it's very mission specific and tailored around, hunting. You didn't try to do everything all at once. It was, we're geared towards backcountry hunters. We're going to frame it around the season and around these type of physical challenges. And yeah, that whole hedgehog principle, like do less better, which is something I can say, but is always hard for me to practice and apply. And I love the mental aspect you integrate into it. Because I'm always curious, do mentally tough people naturally migrate to these things, or does training up for these type of things, or going, yeah, I'm gonna go backcountry hunting in Nevada for 8 days.
Mhm.
Do they become mentally tough, or were they mentally tough and that's what drew them to it?
Yeah, so fascinating.
Yeah. And I would guess it's, a combination of, a little bit of both probably. So if you had to distill it down, like what's your person, I'm big purpose driven, value based, we've worked together now long enough, that's huge to me. But like what is your why, man? What's this all about?
I think I know my why is about helping other people live that abundant life. And I think it's kind of like helping people to the best of my ability, kind of not be in that situation I was in where we kind of started the story. So, the more we can do so that people aren't just following what the world's telling them to do, they're actually following their purpose and mission and passions, and going after the things that they want to go after, which sounds unique, right? Because like we Mountain Tough trains backcountry hunters and a lot of military athletes. And so from the outside, it looks like we're offering that mission specific training, which we certainly are. But what we see that we're actually doing the most of is a lot of complete life transformations, because like the mind body connection is so strong that training for a hunt is actually going to cause that person to be sharper at work. They're going to be a better husband. They're going to be a better father. They're going to be a better friend. The training journey itself is going to teach them a lot before they even get on that hunt. And then we know at that point, they're starting that training journey. They're sleeping better. They're feeling better. They're eating better. And now we have the ability to also deliver them some more mental toughness content, some mindset content, like your course is available in the app. We also can help them on their spiritual journey. We can also help them on their nutritional journey. And so like my big why is how much, how much positive change can we make in as many people as possible through this pathway of backcountry hunting, military training, backcountry athletes, because we call it the positive bait and switch, where something that happens a lot is someone will draw a Colorado elk tag. They live in the Midwest and they're intimidated by the high elevation. They're intimidated by the backcountry, the rugged terrain. They've had friends that have been out west before and got crushed by the mountain and have been stuck in camp. So that individual will draw the Colorado elk tag. They'll know that they need to do something to get better prepared and they'll sign up for Mountain Tough. And that's kind of our positive bait and switch moment because they signed up specifically because of that Colorado elk tag. But what we know is a lot more is about to happen in that individual. And we can actually help that individual live that abundant life because all of these things really stack on top of each other. Because if you're sleeping better and you're eating better and you're exercising better, all of a sudden you start thinking more clearly and you start thinking like, maybe I should go after that entrepreneurship journey that has been in the back of my mind for 10 years, but I quite haven't had the energy to go after it, or I haven't quite had the community to support me to go after it. So all of those really awesome life changes start happening just because someone decides like they're going to train for a hunt or train for a school, which I love. Like it's really cool to see that happen day after day.
Yeah, I think even, someone who goes, hey, I'm going to do the 4 week, the minimum gear foundations program, for example. Like I'm just the discipline of doing it and walking through it. Like you build that self-efficacy, you build that confidence. I mean, if I'm working out and smoking myself for 45 minutes a day, then I don't want to eat garbage. I want to fuel that a little better. I'm smoked, so I sleep at night. I want my rest. I sleep better. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of that upward spiral, and rapidly. I think James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits, right? Like good habits breed good habits, bad habits breed bad habits. So just that initial decision and commitment of like, all right, I'm gonna give this a shot, whether the vehicle's a hunt or the vehicle someone told me about this, or it's training up for a school, and then you get all that collateral exposure. And it's funny, I talked to someone from Arkansas that I worked with for a good chunk of last year, and yeah, he had a Colorado elk hunt. Mountain Tough was his vehicle for training, and
Yeah.
it led to so many other, like it transformed his life. Better person as a result of it. So I absolutely love it.
These
Um,
things, I think these impacts are bigger than people realize. I mean, we had a gentleman in our gym this morning. I was down walking on the treadmill, just warming up for my morning routine. And he's kind of like a legend backcountry hunting celebrity. His name's Randy Newberg. He's kind of like the king of do it yourself backcountry public land hunting. And he's been self filming himself for about 20 years. And he's just like salt of the earth, nicest guy ever, but he was never into fitness ever. And he got older and he actually developed a liver condition. And then he actually tore some tendons in his arm. And he's like, I gotta start training. I got to uh, be more physically ready to do more hunts that I want to do in my life. And that journey alone has been really cool. But what I saw this morning was he came and started walking on the treadmill next to me, and we were both warming up at the same time. And he said, you know what's happening, Dustin, is my wife's watching me do these mountain tough workouts all the time. And my wife also hasn't trained in the last 15 years. And she's like, man, watching Randy train every morning, like I should start training. And so now she's thinking about like how she's going to start her training journey. And like those impacts just kind of keep the ripple effect just keeps happening. Like your kids are paying attention to what you're doing. They're soaking all this stuff up like a sponge. And who knows what, impact that'll have in the next 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the ripple effect is awesome, right? You're throwing the pebble in the pond, just you're trying to lose a few pounds or train up for a specific hunt or, whatever the goal is. And then the impact that has both with yourself as well as those in your orbit, friends, family. Yeah. Always watching.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I've seen that countless times. I mean, I've personally seen it. I'll go, you know, do a workout in the garage. Next thing I know, I'll have one or two kids with me getting after it. And now they're at the age where they're stronger and fitter than me, so I don't like it as much anymore. It's like
Yeah.
proud dad, sad dad moment. We're like, huh, how many times are you gonna squat that 315, Shocko? Let's take 45s off and let dad get on the rack. But it's absolutely cool to see the impact it has across the board, man. I love it. So this kind of ties into it, but StoneWater training really focuses on developing leaders, developing organizations. What are your thoughts as far as something like Mountain Tough, both the physical and the mental toughness? How does that tie into, in your opinion, leadership and developing better teams? Like, is there a tie in there? I mean, does fitness matter to a leader? I work with a lot of folks who don't have default fitness routines. I mean, that's one of the early things we usually work on, if that's a goal of theirs. But what do you see as far as correlation between the two?
Yeah, I think it's huge. And and it becomes more clear and more important to me every year, but there's so much to unpack there. Because from a leader perspective and a fitness perspective, the things that I'm seeing now are you certainly want to follow people that lead by example. And you certainly want to work around more people that are motivated and passionate and fired up. And there is a word for it that I was talking to a friend about yesterday, but it is the word soul force. Like like if you walk in a room, Phil, you have this characteristic, this soul force where you're going to walk in the room and just your presence is going to make the Mountain Tough team work a little bit harder. The Mountain Tough team is going to kind of stand up a little bit straighter. And that's going to happen without you saying anything at all. It's just because of who you are. And even if we didn't know anything about your past, that impact would still happen because of that energy that you're carrying. And that energy that you're carrying, a lot of it is very closely related to some of the physical things you've gone after, some of the mental things you've gone after, because you have a cumulative experience of doing hard things and pushing yourself in different ways. And so an analogy I use sometimes is like a leader who has a good morning routine. And so let's say the leader cold plunges every morning and then does a workout before anyone else walks into the office at 8. So they have a strong physical fitness protocol and regimen. That leader is going to be a lot more powerful than someone who's not focused on that stuff at all, because like there's a psychological effect of getting in that cold plunge. There's the impact of like, hey, I don't want to get in that thing, but I'm going to force myself to get in that thing. So that alone is huge, because now you forced yourself to do a hard thing. There's a lot there, but you gave yourself some confidence by doing what you said you were going to do. There's a ton there. But then now you have all the biological impacts of that cold plunge too. So now you get the dopamine, and then you go into a morning workout. You told yourself you were going to do that. You did it. Now you have some more confidence, but plus you have all the biological impacts. So now like you're feeling better, you're moving better. You also get more dopamine, more endorphins. And so at 8 o'clock, when everyone rolls into the office, your impact as a leader is substantially different than someone without a physical or mental routine.
Man, yeah, you dropped some bombs there on me. So I've never heard the soul force thing before, but I totally get it because I've absolutely seen that when some people just they radiate, there's something coming off them. And
Mhm.
I've been around, women and men who they just you just gravitate towards them. And usually there is a physical presence, but it's more than that. It's a mental, emotional, spiritual presence as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think in air quotes, maybe it's that like natural leadership or whatever. Um, I never really thought about the physical context of that.
Hmm.
I definitely I see it as, you need to know yourself, lead yourself to be a really effective leader of others over long term, right? Like it starts within. And
Yeah.
I think fitness is now there's odd people out there that enjoy running, like Lindsay, for example. Like for her, it's a gift in and of itself. But for people like me and maybe you before you started doing your series of ultras, like I don't enjoy running, but I enjoy making myself do things that make me better, like in getting out of bed. And usually I don't enjoy running for about the first 30 seconds. And then I'm like, I'm so glad I did this. It can be pouring rain, snowing, up downhill, mud, my dog's wrapping the leash around my leg, whatever it is, but it's good to be out there. And you finish and you're like, man, I've never finished a workout or a run or a ruck or anything physically demanding at the end and gone, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. But it takes that self-leadership to first do it, which I think is huge. I think people recognize that. Maybe that ties into that soul force concept, right? Like, well, this
Yeah.
is a person who's living by design, not by default. So I think most people, we react to our environment, we adapt to it, and we settle into it. Whether that's we're told to get a degree and get a good job and have our 2.2 kids, or if you're a Cornichuk, have eight, or something else, like we just settle into comfort, and then we realize, like as Michael Easterman talks about, the comfort crisis, and I've always said, comfort kills.
Yeah.
Uh, Easy is not good over long term. So I definitely see the fitness and the self-leadership aspect of it, but I like that, yeah, that concept of it. It just, there's a lot of biological and disciplinary mechanics going on that, fitness impacts leadership. So I love that piece of it. And I think just doing it builds mental toughness. Mentally tough people typically lead. And the ripple effect of having a fitness routine is, again, if I'm a leader, if I want to work out at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, well, I'm not going to stay up till 1 in the morning, you know polishing off a 40 or whatever. I'm going to try to get some rest. I'm going to try to eat a little cleaner. I'm going to be more mentally present. I'm going to have a little more of the demeanor and kind of that the cover of the book looks like a leader type thing, if that makes sense. So I totally dig it. You're leading Mountain Tough now, by extension, I think you're leading in, mountain, people who are mountain toughers out there, not just your team, but the athletes who subscribe to it. And I don't
Mhm.
mean that you're like sitting there, giving edicts from your studio, but what I mean is, to me, leadership is leveraging influence to achieve an impact. It's when Randy Newberg starts the workout routine and people around him go, oh, yeah, maybe I should do that. Like that's leadership to me. He's not telling them anything. He's just living his life.
Just living it.
Um, yeah, and there's that, you're leading by example, not even consciously. I think we're all doing it positively, negatively, constantly. And, especially those close in our orbit are affected by it. But I'd be curious, man, like who's a leader that really had an impact on you?
Yeah, I think that the the leaders that have had the greatest impact on me are like certainly the ones that lead the most by example for sure. So like leading by example always catches my eye more than anyone else. And I've had, some great business leaders in, growing up. I've had some great coaches and sport leaders, but the leaders that the leaders that have impacted me the most are some of these guys I've just had the privilege of being on some of these crazy backcountry hunts on, because I think that that's where you see leadership in black and white when you're kind of put in some of those environments. And so we've had some crazy Montana trips where uh, you have like severe cold, severe snowpack, and you have a mission and an objective to go after like a certain animal for a certain amount of days. And that's where I've really seen leadership shine. Like Mountain Tough worked with a outdoor videographer, photographer named Sam Everett, and Sam was a he was a smoke jumper and then transitioned into being an outdoor videographer. And he worked with us on these hunts for a long time. And he he just kind of, without probably intentionally doing it on all of these trips, he kind of stepped in and overtook that leadership role without talking about it. And he would portray all those leadership characteristics that just made you want to follow him. And everything that he asked like anyone to do, he was doing himself. And it's kind of like in those environments, you get to see all of like all of the mental toughness tips and the mental fitness hacks. You get to see all of those like right in front of your eyes. And so like it would be so cold and so miserable, and he would still be optimistic. And it would be so daunting to think about like being out there for a couple more days, but for him it's like he could be out there a couple more months and it wouldn't even bother him. And you would just start to feed off that. And like there was always one more thing to try, and there was always one more ridge to cross over, and none of that was ever a big deal to him. Where certainly on other trips you've seen where like that negative leadership can get you back to the truck 2 days before you should have been there, because as soon as someone like brings the team down negatively, you're kind of all going to go there. But because he had such a positive force in those harsh conditions, it just kind of lit this fire under you. It was really cool. And like I always love thinking about that, because like in business, you don't always see those leadership examples as obvious as you do when like you're outside, you're cold, you're hungry. And that's where I've seen like leadership can make it just a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like so Sam definitely stood out. I mean, showed up. He was a competent, tough individual, just given his background. So he was adept in the environment. But really, what sounds like made an impression on you was just kind of optimistic. Didn't focus on the negative. Didn't focus on the misery. Kind of embraced it, smiled through it. It sounds like probably laughed about it. I mean, what else are you gonna do, right? You can be cold, wet, and miserable, or you can just be cold and wet. And that sounds like he's very much kind of that relentless solution focused. Like, okay, get over that ridge. Let's go here. Let's try this. Let's do that. I can always do something. And I mean, when people have that mindset, and even to business, like you think when the initiative falls flat on its face, when COVID hits and your business world turns upside down, when the market nosedives on you, um, I love watching and working with the leaders who have that. Okay, so now what? Like it is what it is. The environment. We're not going to sit here and spend weeks and months diagnosing the problem. We know what it is. Let's get after a solution. And is the first one going to work? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But the second one might, or the third one, or the fourth one. The point is, we're going to keep trying things, not frantically, but we're always going to have that positive solution focus. Versus, once I see teams and leaders start focusing on, exclusively on damage control, and they're just trying to stop the bleeding, and they no longer are focused on forward movement. They're just focused on that kind of scarcity mindset and holding what they got. I'm like, start to watch. Like that organization, that individual is going to be in a world of hurt.
Yep.
I was working with someone. I'm like, be really careful about fear-based decisions. No one ever won a war by digging really good trenches. You've got to move forward. You've got to Doesn't mean it's always going to, not every initiative is going to be a great initiative, but if you just sit there and do damage control for the entire span, like it's going to be short.
Yeah.
Um, you've got to adapt to the environment. You got to move forward, and I love here, and that requires an optimistic mindset because if you're focused on the problem, you can't, like, it gets bigger and bigger. What you focus on expands. So love it,
It
man.
it seems also like it seems like a lot of great leaders, uh, like I love reading Relentless Solution Focus. I know you do as well, but it is a game changer for sure. But it's kind of like what Sam had and what a lot of great leaders have is they've been thinking in a solution mindset for so long. It's really natural to them. They're
Yeah.
not, it's like they're not hitting up against an obstacle and saying like, oh, I need to switch gears to a solution focus. It's so natural to them. They just go there right away. And because they go there right away, you have so much confidence in them. You're going with them because it's like they've been doing it long enough that that is their instinct rather than their instinct to go fear, which
Yeah.
is which is really cool. I mean, it's really helpful because it's like the more you do that, the more you practice it, the more that's going to become your bias versus like a fear-based bias.
And that's what I was going to ask you. So how do you build that, right? So for someone who's not naturally, I didn't grow up in an environment that was like that. I didn't have parents or teachers or coaches that fostered that mentality. How does someone build that optimism, solution focused mindset?
I think think from what I've seen is it is a cumulative of challenging experiences because I've seen that people that don't have quite a few core experiences under their belt when adversity strikes tend to go more panicky and fear based than others. So that's what's so great about like what you're doing on your trips. Like the more that leaders can put themselves in uncomfortable situations and the more of those situations you can get under your belt and they should all be different and challenging in their own way. It's sometimes that can be in a in your own environment too through a workout, creating your own challenge, creating your own trip, creating your own like adventure where you're going to go somewhere new. The more you can get yourself in front of adversity to practice going solution focused, the better. And I think like limiting our experiences is gonna limit how good we can be at that.
Yeah, so you're basically saying it's, just like training for backcountry. You're like, no, man, look for challenging situations to put yourself into by choice, so that when it happens to you, not by choice, you've got those muscles, you've got those tools, you know how to use them versus someone who, just kind of go with the flow for most of their life, and then when they're flipped on their head and a relationship goes sideways or they get diagnosed with cancer or whatever kind of challenge life throws at them, because it will. If you practice adversity, you're going to be a lot more mentally prepared than someone who's like, well, I was picked the easy path, but now there is no, now I don't have a choice anymore. And yeah, and kind of inoculate yourself from that negative attitude. Love it, man. I mean, if you don't mind if you don't mind sharing, like what's been, one of your most defining, your most difficult leadership challenges you faced?
Yeah, my most difficult leadership challenge that I have faced, and always think about ways that I can get better around is the people component of like leadership in a small business and a business. So certainly leadership for me is easier when I can just lead by example with like a small team right next to me. That's when leadership seems to be easier and natural for me is like if I have a couple guys right next to me and we have a mission we're going after, that seems to be a lot different than when your organization grows and your organization is growing, which is amazing. But now you have people that are removed a couple steps from you. You don't see them as much. You don't interact with them as much. You can't be around them as much as that close, tight knit team. And so then the leadership challenge seems to present itself in like, how do I really lead and inspire and motivate that individual that's on our team that I really don't see or interact with that much. That's certainly been one of my biggest challenges, and that challenge only expands as we grow. So, as we continue to grow, which is amazing, and we're so blessed and fortunate from that perspective. But the the people situations from a leadership perspective under growth continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, see, and that makes me want to dive into culture, but I also am looking at the clock, so I know we don't have to. That'll be another podcast, another time. But that's when you have that when the organization has a culture that sustains even when individual leaders aren't present. But yeah, definitely, I think the people dynamic is so tricky, right? Those difficult conversations that when someone who you love and trust does something that you're like, oh, we got to address this. This is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff is so hard. And I'll tell people look at my past and they're like, oh, it must have been, in combat, this must have been hard, or that was hard. And I go, the toughest things I ever did by far, where I was most nervous and stomach and knots. And I'm not proud of this, but it's usually when I'd have to call someone on the team about, when they went sideways. And it was usually like a legal, moral, ethical issue. It was nothing to do with tactics or you zigged when you should have zagged. It was like
Yep.
something they did that was wrong. And this is someone who, I loved and trusted, and they might actually save my life. And now I'm gonna have to be like, hey, that's wrong and there's consequences and we got to address this. Those are the hard things for me. It wasn't the, X's and O's and arrows on a playboard for, a sport or a business or something. So, all right, man,
Yep.
I want to be hyper respectful of your time, but last thought as we break off here, Dustin. So what's next for Mountain Tough?
Next big steps for Mountain Tough are, we're continuing to add a lot of products, add different coaches, add different innovative and creative training styles. Our big mission at Mountain Tough is to change 100,000 lives by 2026. And we want to change those lives holistically, which means we're going to take care of them physically, spiritually, mentally, and nutritionally. And for Mountain Tough to achieve that goal, we need very excellent world-class content, but we also need an excellent and world-class app so that content is delivered in the most thoughtful, creative, impactful way. And we also need a variety of coaches and coaching style, because everyone learns in different ways and everyone's attracted to different personalities. And so we are producing a tremendous amount of content to make sure that we can change 100,000 lives by 2026.
Awesome. I love that. I love how you addressed, people receive information differently and different things, change lives in different ways. So, but that's a hell of a mission. I love it. And I just like how you're like, hey, we got to do things different. We got to do it world class. We got to do more, better, and appeal to all types. So amazing. Dustin, love you, appreciate you and the whole Mountain Tough team and what you guys do. Not just what I've seen you do for others, but even, personally, my family, how Mountain Tough's had an impact there and continues to make me better. So thank you. Thank you so much for your time, man. I'm excited to share this with others. And until next time, stay dangerous, brother.
Likewise, Phil. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Love that you're doing a podcast. It's going to be amazing, and love you too, man.
All right, brother.